let's talk about. I guess we can talk about some of the Apple stuff. And contrary to what you might suspect, not all that excited.
Really?
Jordan Drake is not. So we'll start with the watch, and then we'll get to the MacBook. And I will say for the watch, this story written here by Mr. Jeff Gager, the details of which I'm sure most of everyone already knows. We didn't learn a lot more about the watch's capabilities from an app perspective, which I think was a big disappointment and I think a big miss on Apple's part. We did, of course, learn a lot more about the pricing for these various editions of the watch, starting at, what is it, $349 for the sport version, which is sort of your gym everyday. I'm poor, so I had to pay $349 version. Not really poor, but it is the everyman's version. And then you get up to the, what is it, Apple Watch?
Just plain Apple Watch.
Plain Apple Watch, right? And that's what, $549 and up?
$549 and up. Yeah.
And that goes all the way up to $1,000 depending which band you get. And then you get to the Apple Watch Edition, which is $15,000. Now, all the way up to I think $17,000 is the most expensive one.
Right.
It starts at 10.
It starts
and
at
only
10
goes
grand,
up from
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 10, but it goes up to 17 depending on which watch band you pick. And I'm happy to let everyone else chime in here, but I will just say, as the resident Apple fan, because by the way, I'm now the only one who hasn't. Once again, another reason that it's had. I'm the only one left who hasn't met. Anyway, not that he ever chimed in for any of the Mac stuff, but anyway, God. I hated that guy. Anyway,
this is the denial and this is the bargaining and all these different stages are just coming out.
Stages of grief.
Yeah, it's rough, man.
Hold on to your butts, folks. It's gonna be a crazy episode. Anyway, the point is that my take is that, okay, we saw nothing that we hadn't seen before as far as the functionality. The interface looks confusing because not only can you touch, but you can touch, force touch, push the button on the side, and roll the knob on the top. We didn't see any really third party. We saw some third party app integration, right? You can get your airline ticket, and you can, it'll check your heartbeat, and then there's, what was the third party one there? You can check, baseball scores because apparently people still watch baseball.
Ooh.
Sorry, I'm not a
ESPN
baseball fan.
Devils as glanceables.
Yeah, so there was some third party, but there was no demo from some really crazy cool app that we hadn't seen before, and what the reveal was really these prices. Now, what I'm disappointed in is the fact that I don't feel like the interface is going to be intuitive. I'm disappointed in the fact that I didn't feel like there was a ton of functionality. It wasn't just taking everything your iPhone currently does and putting it on your wrist. What I am not disappointed in is the price of the gold watch. And this is what I find so fascinating is people, to be fair, so many people do understand this, but a lot of people seem to completely misunderstand that I think it's 1 in 8 people in New York City make more than $1 million a year. And there's 8 million people in this city. In just Manhattan. That's not the tri-state area. The amount of money that people have in this city, in London, in France, in Russia, in China to blow on expensive things is the reason that Rolex and Omega and Maserati and all these companies exist. So if Apple wants to go make a $15,000 watch, people will buy it.
Sure.
I guarantee you.
Oh, sure.
There's
And
no question about that. So people are like, oh, who's going to buy it? It's like a lot of people are going to want this. Are you kidding me?
well, there's a marketing function of this too, right? Say that your watch tops out at $550, $600, and you're going into a market where people are putting down a chunk of change for a Tag Heuer or whatever it is, right? You have a perception issue there because you're the bargain only
You're right.
thing.
You're
And so not playing in the higher end of that market doesn't actually work well from a perception standpoint. I think for Apple, they need to be a status symbol like other watches are status symbols in order to have a real chance of taking that slot from somebody who's on somebody's wrist, a rich person who is buying a status symbol. And they're not going to replace it with a $550 watch. So
Well, the other thing too is someone said, well, why wouldn't that person just go buy a Rolex? This person already has a Rolex. If you're spending $10,000 on something because you got your big $3 million bonus from your job at Morgan Stanley, you already have a Rolex at home. You have a watch keeper like Tony Stark that turns all your watches to keep the little internal mechanisms charged up. this is the world that Apple's entering into, the luxury world. I mean, and like, so it's funny. I have a lot of friends who work at places like Ralph Lauren and Louis Vuitton and some other places, and these are, they charge $2,000 for an alligator skin belt, and they sell a lot of them. So the point is, there is that world, and I think that people just sort of people go $15,000 for a watch. I never, and then there's this line about it being obsolete. Now, this is my personal theory, and I don't think it's confirmed by any rumors at all. But my thought is, if you actually drop the coin on the gold Apple Watch, I'd be willing to bet you that when they come up with a new version of the watch, even if they change some of the hardware, they might come up. I would think that Apple would be smart too. Maybe they won't. A way where you can take your gold watch to them, and they'll either swap it out, melt down the gold, and use it for another watch, or they'll replace the internal components with whatever the newer internal components are, specifically for the Apple Watch edition, starting at 10 grand a piece. Just my theory. I could be wrong, but I feel like the gold in the watch is worth something. So if the hardware becomes obsolete, Apple would want to do something to keep that up. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Jordan, did you hear Tim Cook said there are limited quantities of the Apple Watch edition, the expensive one available? I think that type of enforced scarcity in this market is something that people do, right?
Yep.
And it's possible, just possible, that those things become collector's editions. Even if it's not the greatest, latest hardware, right? But it's weird. It's weird to meld the world of consumer electronics, where everything is like disposable and has a short life cycle and is relatively cheap, with the world of these watches where they're heirlooms and they cost tons of money compared to what the materials are worth and that kind of thing. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. But clearly they were trying to meld those two dynamics with the products, and I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if 5-10 years from now those edition ones are in going for more money in auctions and stuff. It could happen.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about this being the first Apple Watch too. I mean, regardless of whatever happens, if this is wildly successful, it's the first in a wildly successful product. If this is a giant flop, then this becomes one of those little Mac cubes that people collect because it was horrible. So I think if you've got a limited edition product, then yeah, I think those $10,000 watches will probably. I mean, the thing that I don't get as much is there isn't. I mean, maybe the band sets them apart visually, but for a high-end watch, the $10,000 one looks a lot like the $350 one to me. So it seemed like the materials are different, but if I was a watch guy, I think I would expect more differentiation, because you sort of have to know about the watch to sort of realize the differences between them, I think. But
I think just visually, people are gonna be like, "Oh, is that the gold one?" I don't know. I think that. Well, so let's talk. I think the MacGuffin of the gold watch is what everyone likes to talk about, and my other earlier concerns, I think, are certainly not, I think, uncommon amongst even some of the Mac fans, in the sense that I'm not sure the rest of the watch is incredibly exciting.
Well, I mean, that's true, because no less than John Gruber of Daring Fireball said, or he looked at he wasn't at the event, surprisingly, but he looked at some of the impressions of people who did go, and they said that the interface was confusing, and he said, well, that's not good. So for someone who's so usually cheerleady,
yes, that's
of
a really
Apple,
good point.
even he's concerned. And I mean, it does sound kind of like a little rough right now, so who knows?
Yeah.
All I can say is they've got the money, and hopefully they've got the stamina to stay it through and turn this, just like the first iPhone didn't have the App Store, and people thought that was the dumbest thing, and it was the dumbest thing. So maybe we have a few years to work out the kinks before this is a winner, and maybe it's a one-hit wonder that goes away. The one-hit not wonder.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. It's not an iPhone. It's not that revolutionary. It doesn't have to be a success. Right. They have some ridiculous number of iPhone owners. I saw some stat, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they said if a very small percentage of iPhone owners bought one of these, then they would have some ridiculous number in sales, right?
Yeah, I mean,
huge amounts.
Even if they sold a small number of these, to a small percentage of iPhone owners, it would still be a multi-billion-dollar business.
Right. So
I mean,
and honestly, my problem with it is that because with the absence of apps that are exciting and sensors that are really different or better than what you get in a phone, I'm not clear on like I'm not going to buy one, and I'm not tempted to buy one, and I'm not saying it couldn't be a good thing eventually, but I'm not looking at this and saying like I need to make room in my budget for that someday. I'm not there yet.
But the other question is, guys, do you have any other smartwatch?
No, and honestly, none of them are compelling enough for me to want.
See, that's another point.
Yeah.
Is that I also feel like it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think anyone's really sold in this category yet.
Yeah.
Well, it has to do something.
Right.
Right.
The disappointing thing for me is there was sort of rumors at the beginning that would have all sorts of biometric functions, which is, for a wearable, if you're going to be wearing something on your body, you might want to do that instead of carrying a smartphone, or in addition to, if you can get extra information and extra capabilities for it to be physically attached to you. But it sounds like a bunch of the sensors that they were working on for measuring, stress levels and some other blood pressure didn't work reliably enough, so they actually nixed them from the final design. So all you have is a heart rate sensor, which is available on a whole bunch of other smartwatches and fitness bands already. So, it's sort of, I think, a lost opportunity, especially with their big health kit initiative that they've got. But it is something that could maybe improve in future versions. I think a watch can actually be compelling if you can give people interesting biometric information that you gather from their wrist.
Yeah. And Jordan, let's move on and talk about the MacBook.
I had about 30 more minutes of material.
Oh,
on
okay.
this.
Sorry.
No, I will just say one real fast thing, then we can move on. I do think that what I had understood is that Apple originally wanted to do a bunch of different, like, measuring your sweat for sugar,
Blood sugar.
all
Yeah.
that stuff. And the problem, I think, it was just they can't make consistent contact with your skin, and so that just became an issue. So that was what I had
I
heard.
think
like that.
Like the other thing they ran into with that, I think, was if you're going to make a device like that, it has to be approved by the FDA, or at least that was my impression, and that was
Right.
going to be another major obstacle.
Right.
So.
No, absolutely. So a lot of interesting things behind the scenes, I'm sure. But we'll see how they. I think the true test will be how they go moving forward, regardless of whether or not it's a hit or not, and what they can do to either make it a hit or move on. But we'll see.